This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Good morning. My name is Carlo Martuscelli, and I'm a reporter covering healthcare in Europe. And you're watching Politico Live, the live extension of Politico's unbiased journalism. I'm coming from you today from Martin's Hotel in Brussels. It's been delayed and delayed again, but this is it. We're just one day away from the Commission finally publishing its revision of the general pharmaceutical legislation. But even though the text isn't officially out yet, it's already causing plenty of drama. With a sector worth around 1.4% of the bloc's GDP and employing almost 3 million people according to industry figures, its importance can't be overstated. It shows from the political reaction so far. We've seen letters from high-profile MEPs from both sides of the political spectrum, and capitals jostling with their respective position papers. In the Council, the battle lines are drawn. Germany and Denmark are more in favor of the industry position, while other countries like the Netherlands, Austria, and Poland are taking the opposite view. Reportedly, even the Commission President herself is taking an interest in the file, delaying changes until she's able to see the draft. But beyond the back and forth of politics, there are people's lives at stake. Patients in Poland, on average, wait 2 years more than patients in Germany to get a new medicine. We know that the Commission wants to tackle this issue by carefully tailoring incentives in order to encourage equal access throughout the EU. The pharmaceutical industry warns that this is going to make Europe an even less attractive place to invest in. How do you strike the right balance between access and innovation? That'll be the topic of today's discussion. But first things first, some general housekeeping remarks. First of all, I'd like to thank our partner Bayer for making this event possible, and also our audience who's joining us on site and also online. We want to make this event as interactive as possible, so you can participate by tweeting about it at @LivePolitico, and you can ask questions through Slido using hashtag #PoliticoHealthShift. You know who I am, so I'll be prioritizing questions where the name of the organization and the panelist is visible for our own panelists. You can already share your thoughts and answer the following poll presented by Bayer. How can the EU ensure increased patient access to new innovative medicines in Europe? But before we get started, we'll now hear some opening remarks from our partner, Christine Roth, member of the Executive Committee of Bayer, and head of the Oncology and Strategic Business Unit and Pharmaceuticals Division. But before that, a short video.
All of us have, I guess, a personal history, as I do, with family members suffering from cancer, seeing often the limitations of the treatments, but also seeing how novel treatments like immunotherapy really can make a difference. Precision oncology means you really tailor the therapy to the patient. It should be reducing the side effects and really address the molecular mechanism of the cancer and not just being a general cytotoxic approach like chemotherapy has been. Drug development really needs persistence from the initial idea of a new drug and a new target until clinical trials and then eventually, hopefully, to launch of a new medication. It takes often more than 10 years. It's really often teams, more than 30, 40, 50 people that are involved in such a project. To be honest, the failure rate, of course, is immense. In the end, maybe 3, 4, 5% of the early ideas that we bring forward that eventually make it to patients into the clinics. I think we need clear regulations across Europe that support innovation. We need information. We need good registries to know what types of cancer do patients suffer from, how do patients respond to treatment, where do we have to improve. There's still no cure for cancer, and we have to further improve to really bring the best therapy to the patients.
And Christine, if you'd like to join us on the podium.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Let me extend my own welcome to today's event. I hope will be a very productive dialogue about the upcoming legislation that we're all so eagerly awaiting to learn more about. Let me start first by conveying my own sense of pleasure that I have today and the privilege that it is to be talking to you about breaking barriers in innovation and access, as I have both in my personal and my professional life experienced the value that these innovations can bring. One of my first and most fulfilling experiences in the pharmaceutical industry was to be a pioneer in the immuno-oncology area, an area that had been sacked with 20 failed phase 3 studies and so much disbelief that people thought that we were actually a little bit crazy for continuing to pursue it. But I've led teams that have delivered the first IO drugs, and we all know how important those are in the treatment of cancer today. And I've also led teams that delivered the first precision, personalized medicines and combinations of those medicines that have helped patients who were ready to enter hospice care go into the hospital, blind, unable to walk because of spinal or brain lesions, and actually 3 to 4 days later walk out being able to see and ambulatory in their own way. Many of these patients are still leading fulfilling lives 8 years later when they were told they had less than a 5% chance to live 5 years. Now, these types of innovations require strong commitments from multiple stakeholders, and the regulatory and policy environment in which these transformations can take place are extremely important. Therefore, the choices that we make today will inform and define our future. We believe that a legislative framework that will be fit for purpose for the next 20 years should accelerate patient access to innovative medicines and foster a policy and regulatory environment that encourages and rewards innovation with strong incentives. Unfortunately, some proposals in their current form might have the opposite effect. A worrying trend shows that just 25 years ago, 50% of all new treatments originated in Europe. Now that figure is sadly 1 in 5. In 2002, the U.S. spent $2 billion more than Europe in R&D. Today, that figure is $25 billion, a 1,000% increase. Clinical trials, which represent the earliest mode of access to innovative therapies for patients, are also increasingly moving to Asia Pacific and the U.S. Clinical trial activity is twice as high in the U.S. and almost 3 times as high in China than it is in Europe. But if we act now, this drift away from Europe can be reversed. At Bayer, we have the passion and the determination to develop innovative medicines that help improve and extend the lives of people living with cancer. And as you've seen in our video introduction, the pharmaceutical research and development, it is a marathon full of significant hurdles. The process requires immense resources and dedication of skilled researchers. The development of innovative cancer treatments can take more than 10 years and a plethora of skill sets and resources working together. And typically only 1 in 10 potential medicines that enters the clinic reaches the successful first step of reaching it to patients, and that is regulatory approval. So there's failure around the corner at every step along the way. Now, we've seen that the impact of cancer on people's lives can be absolutely devastating. I am the daughter of a breast cancer survivor of over 45 years, and we know how lucky we were with my mom. Current projections suggest that cancer cases could rise by almost 25% by 2035, which would make it the EU's #1 cause of death. And so, therefore, supporting frameworks such as the EU Beating Cancer Plan are fundamental to help achieve progress and reduce healthcare inequalities. Unfortunately, even when new treatment solutions make it to the market, inequalities at the time of patient access remain. Ensuring that patients get faster, more equitable, and sustainable access to innovative medicines in Europe is a common ambition that we all share. And over the past year, Bayer, as a part of the Industry Trade Association, developed a series of concrete proposals to improve patient access to innovative medicines and reduce inequalities across Europe. For instance, the industry commits to filing pricing and reimbursement applications in all EU countries within 2 years after approval, provided those local systems allow it. And the EU has a strong history of being the birthplace of innovation in science, whether it's the field of biology, pharmaceutical manufacturing, or even physics and chemistry. Critical thinking and the committed pursuit of excellence are the core societal values that led to this rich history of innovation across Europe. We believe that by partnering and working together, we will also be able to address present and future crises and challenges and make the EU a leader again in medical innovation while strengthening the resilience of European healthcare systems. I hope that today's event can spark a fruitful discussion in this direction. So thank you, and I look forward to an engaging and productive discussion.
Thank you, Christine. Now let's jump to the panel discussion. We're going to discuss all of those topics you brought out, from access to innovation and so on. But first, I just want to say that the Commission was meant to join us today, but because of delays to the legislation, they pulled out because they didn't want to comment on a document that hadn't been published yet, which I guess is understandable. But I am happy to say that in their place, we have not one, but 2 MEPs from rival political groups who are going to be involved in negotiating the European Parliament's position on the proposals. We have MEP Cyrus Engerer from Malta of the SND and member of the Envy Committee. And joining us a bit later, we'll also have MEP Peter Liese of Germany from the European People's Party group, member and coordinator of the Envy Committee. And also joining us today, we have Maria Jesus Lama Diaz, director of the Spanish Agency for Medicines and Health Products. And we also have experts from the world of academia and pharma. We have Dr. Panos Kanavos, associate professor, deputy director of the LSE Health Program and director of the Medical Technology Research Group. And we have Amit Nathwani, CEO of DuPont Therapeutics. So thanks so much to all of our panelists for joining us today. If you want to join me on the podium so we can begin the discussion. So thanks so much, everybody. As I've said to all of you before, but I think our timing with this, in a sense, is unfortunate that the legislative proposal hasn't been published yet. But in another sense, I mean, what more exciting time than just the day before that it's published, and there's you know, if you are a health policy nerd like me, I mean, there is already a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion as to why this has even been delayed. And I guess we're going to see the actual reason tomorrow when the final text is published. But looking ahead for a minute, Maria, I wanted to start with you because Spain is going to take charge of the presidency in July. Now, I know that there's many other health files that the Spanish presidency will be dealing with, but just in terms of pharmaceutical policy, what are Spain's priorities? And would you say that Spain is more likely to prioritize access, like the Netherlands and Belgium from what we've seen in their non-papers, or is it going to align more with Germany and Denmark, who are taking a more, maybe we can call it pro-competitiveness line, or neither? I mean, there's many options, obviously.
Thank you for the question, Carlo, and thank you, Politico, for your invitation to participate in this panel. You know that when we are holding a presidency, we have to be neutral. So first, I wouldn't like to talk about a proposal that is going to be delivered tomorrow, hopefully. So I don't know anything about the proposal,
Sure.
just in case you may think.
I would not dare to suggest that.
But having said that, our proposal is to ensure that citizens can access to the medicines they need. Mm-hmm. So this is big words, and this is clearly aligned with the European pharmaceutical strategy, but it's something that we sense, that we feel, and we have to fight for that, to ensure that patients have the medicines they need that cover unmet medical needs, especially in antibiotics and antimicrobial resistance, rare diseases, and at the same time that we are able to support a competitive industry that can compete with the other regions in the world successfully.
Sure. And Maria, you're in charge of a regulator. So one thing I was curious to know from you is it your sense when you're speaking with the pharmaceutical companies and interacting with them, do you think that the regulatory framework is a strong enough tool where you can try and get these companies to research in these areas of unmet medical need? I mean, as in, I guess what I'm asking is it really up to the market ultimately, and they're going to research where they see the most profits? Or do you think there's also some space for the regulators and for the EU legislative framework to help guide some of this research in areas that we see are currently underserved?
Yeah, for sure. There is room to improve, and that's why we are looking forward to seeing the new proposal of the legislation. I think that the regulations for orphan medicines or pediatric medicines were really important, and these two regulations have allowed to have medicines for children and more than 200 orphan medicines for rare diseases, but still only 6% of rare diseases have a medicine. And out of these 200 medicines, orphan medicines, only 1/3 are indicated for new indications. Mm-hmm. The other 2/3 are targeted to indications with another alternative. They have been authorized on the basis of significant clinical benefit. So this means that it's a little better than the other alternative, but both are targeted to the same pathology. So there are clear market failures with antibiotics in situations where the resistance makes an infectious diseases lethal diseases. The research in rare diseases need more medicines targeted with those targets not attractive to the market, and the clinical research must to be boosted in Europe. So only 19% of participants in the clinical trials that support centralized authorization here in Europe are Europeans. And this means
Sorry, did you
loss.
say 19%?
Only 19.
Oh, wow. Only 1 in 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this means a loss of representativeness in the data, but also a loss of opportunity for patients, health professionals, and health systems. So there is a lot of room to improve.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. I guess we're going to see tomorrow, in what way the Commission is actually thinking of tackling these issues. But we obviously have an inkling because the Commission has spoken about this quite publicly, and also because we do have leaked drafts of the legislation. I know the panelists probably don't want to discuss leaks, but we know the basic idea, which is one of modulating incentives, where you add and subtract years of data protection in order to cajole the industry in meeting certain social goals, whether those are around access, whether those are around investing in areas of unmet medical need. And Panos, I wanted to get your thoughts on this basic idea, right? Where you modulate, you add, you subtract, and through the structure of incentives, you try and shape the market. I mean, is the fundamental principle sound here?
So you're obviously asking me to comment on a leaked document.
Well,
in a sense, right? So that puts me on the spot. So let's assume that there's no leaked document.
Sure.
So
okay.
Modulating up and down. I think looking at modulation, we used to have price modulation in the United Kingdom up until very recently.
Which is where you're based.
That's right.
Obviously.
Which is where I'm based, and I'm delighted to be here. And thank you for the kind invite. And that worked very well, I think, at least from my perspective. My response would be not knowing precisely what the Commission's proposals are going to be on that front. Well, it depends on the size of the carrot and the stick. If you add something to an existing policy, and then you take something away, then obviously that depends on what the policy is, what targets you're going to address, etc., etc. But it seems to me unreasonable, at least from a completely different perspective, to have one target that an incentive is addressing, which is data protection. And incentivizing and using that to incentivize access, which is another key aspect of the Commission's, let's say, objective. And access means across the EU of 27.
Sorry, can you talk me through that point?
So data is addressing a need, basically. Data exclusivity is additive to the intellectual property armamentarium that we have, right? So we're talking about patents, we're talking about data exclusivities, we're talking about trademarks, etc., etc. Access is a completely different problem. Is a separate issue. And when we're talking about access, we're looking at issues surrounding price. We're looking at issues surrounding use. So we're going to have to address issues around pricing, issues around availability, issues around affordability. So we cannot escape that discussion. So I would expect that there will be something in the legislation proposals to address, let's say, some of these concerns that member states have on the one side, the demand side. But of course, on the supply side, industry also has. I think Christine mentioned earlier on all these fantastic drugs that come to market. But obviously, these drugs that come to market come at a significant cost. Is the price justified? I think this is an area where obviously a lot of national bodies, national authorities are doing quite a lot of work on through HTA, formalized HTA processes. So we need to look at uncertainties, we need to look at a whole bunch of other things, clinical and economic, obviously, issues, but more importantly, issues around unmet medical need, issues around severity, issues around rarity. So the unspoken or the softer dimensions of value, if you will, which come beyond costs and effects. So all these things need to be addressed. So I think trying to address, let's say, one key policy objective, which is access to medicines at affordable costs, with a tool that says, well, I give you 1 year or 2 years in addition to what you have already, or I minus a couple of years and I give you 1 in return if you meet certain access targets. I think to me is a little bit difficult to comprehend. Obviously, the Commission will have thought about it very carefully, because quite clearly they would have done an impact assessment study, right? So we need to look at that. We need to look at that. We need to look at the numbers. We need to look at the numbers of products. We need to look at the possible impact, and so on and so forth. So I'm very much looking forward to joining the debate when these proposals are published.
While Politico Pro subscribers might have seen certain impact assessments, but we'll set that to the side. I did want to ask, of course, in parallel, there's another big pharma reform that is happening across the Atlantic. You know, I don't know the nitty-gritty details, but I do believe the approach is different.
Yes.
They are looking to act directly on that pricing and reimbursement side. I'm, of course, talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. Panelist, how do you compare these two approaches, or is it apples and oranges here? Should we not even be making the comparison?
I think it's completely apples and oranges as far as I'm concerned. If you've looked at the draft legislation, which Medicare enables Medicare to basically negotiate prices, I think these negotiations are going to take place starting on year 9 or year 11 of the eligible products, and I think there's a size issue. In other words, market size issue. I think, from my perspective, looking at what is happening in Europe at the moment, what has been happening not only in Europe but also elsewhere, if you have pricing constraints, or if you have price, let's say, controls and price negotiations, these are happening at the point when a new medicine comes to market. You don't wait for 9 years or 11 years for that to take place. But you have to look at the overall incentive structure there, and of course this may be a well-designed balancing act, such that products are launched faster. Any new innovations are coming to market a lot faster, so that when products are eligible for price negotiation and discounting, because that's what the objective is, then quite clearly industry will have brought more innovations, the line extensions perhaps, or the additional indications or whatever, so that a product sort of revenue, so to speak, tails off a little bit faster and towards the end of its effective patent life. So I think we're looking at a bunch of other things there which are totally different. I think the US system is different, but it's some people may consider the IRA as a Trojan horse. In other words, we start with something which looks palatable from both sides of the game, so industry as well as statutory health insurance, which Medicare is, and Medicaid and the other federal programs. But further down, we see how it goes, and further downstream, we may intensify. So I think there's a fear that if this works, from whatever perspective, then that might be brought a little bit forward. In other words, some of the products will be eligible for negotiation faster. But we're talking about big spenders, in other words, bigger products. So in other words, products that are, if I remember correctly, retail less than 200 million are not included in the plan. So we're talking about different things.
Right. So it's around the blockbuster level.
But effectively, we are addressing genuine concerns on both sides of the Atlantic around pricing and affordability. Let's not forget that prices in the United States are free to increase on an annual basis, whereas in any of the EU member states, prices are flat. Yep. So even if you have a price parity at launch, when you have two products, entering the market, a US price, list price, will be, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50% higher, 3, 4, 5 years post-launch. Whereas in Europe, it will be, in any European member state, it will be flat.
Great.
So there are obvious differences there.
Sure, yeah, no, absolutely. But it does sound like their general issues, keeping in mind the context is very different, is similar, which is obviously around pricing and access. But I wanted to move to you, Amit, and I wanted to leave the kind of rarefied world of policy discussion, which we will return to. But I know that speaking with pharma CEOs and people running businesses, it's actually often surprising what they complain about. And often it's not the same things as we're discussing in policy, you know, in the world of policy and EU pharma legislation. So I wanted to know from your perspective, you know, what are your gripes? What are your pain points around working in Europe? And is there anything from the legislation or that you've heard about the incoming legislation that you either like or really don't like?
Yeah, thank you very much, and hi everyone. So just first of all, I think that we have a lot of gripes, but we also have a lot of, we actually do take legislation extremely seriously, both from the regulatory side as well as the access side. We should, while we're not talking about the IRA in US, we have to remember when we do global development programs, actually learning to actually address global needs actually complexifies clinical development massively. So when you're trying to balance what's happening in the US from a legislation perspective, what's that going to look like downstream, and then you're looking at a completely different set of policies in Europe, it has a fundamental issue on how you deploy your investment. So I just, while we're not going to discuss the US, it's an important part. But if you look in Europe, and I think every person in pharma would say the same things, the things that are top of our mind, which will actually improve innovation, and I think Maria talked on a couple of those things, are there real incentives with real carrots, right? Such as which can extend data exclusivity or IP in key areas that Europe sees as a priority. And I don't mean like just a 1-year extension in exclusivity, because when you spend 2 years negotiating access, 1 year is just, it doesn't make any sense. We have to be very careful that the carrots are actually sized appropriately for the problem you're trying to solve for. And we don't end up with what, using the same analogy, 27 sticks for what is a very small carrot. Because when, you take in the case of biotech is 2/3 of most of the innovation pipelines coming through today. And I run a biotech, it's small, there's no way that I can actually ever afford 27 value dossiers created in time to negotiate price to make sure the access is accessible for these medicines across each country. And for a 1-year extension or a 2-year extension, it's kind of becomes difficult, right?
But isn't the idea of a joint HTA to eventually try and slim down that?
So then a joint HTA with common outcomes, the great thing is with EMA, we've got now common registration. Brilliant. We don't have a common framework for what is an outcome across Europe. How does every healthcare system evaluate the outcome appropriately? And to the point that's been raised, we're doing more and more trials in China, in the US. So in the absence of data, especially for small populations or orphan diseases or rare diseases, how do you get enough patients to then have the data set that you can do it? So what we're looking for is also, is there legislation change on the regulatory side that enables studies to be done? Can we do rolling reviews to speed that process up? Can you use real-world data, synthetic arms? What's happening on the technology evolution that will speed up the process of both trials, approvals, and then you can make the use of the back end around the patent exclusivity as well.
Please, Panos.
Two remarks. I think broadly speaking, the joint HTA will be focusing on assessment. So in other words, looking at, and hopefully avoiding the duplication of effort. I think that's a very important point to remember. The reality, however, is that most member states are doing their own appraisal. And appraisal means that whether a new therapeutic agent is relevant for us. And us means Slovakia, it means Sweden, it means Portugal, and so on and so forth. And in so doing, they factor in their own interpretation of the evidence, which may differ slightly or comprehensively compared with what a European HTA body might do, whilst at the same time factoring in those considerations beyond costs and effects which may matter to them from a priority setting perspective. And it is there that we're talking about the unmet medical needs, the impact of severity, for example. For example, in France, you will never get an ASMR1, for those who are familiar with ASMR1, unless you have a breakthrough product, right, that changes the therapeutic pathway, so to speak, with a clinical endpoint, not a surrogate endpoint, and in a severe disease setting, right? Yeah. So, but that's a unique system, a feature of that healthcare system. Germany is completely different. Poland is completely different.
Sure.
So therefore, all of these things are quite important to bear in mind.
There's a kind of underlying fragmentation.
And that fragmentation will, I suspect, that fragmentation will carry on. So. My suggestion, not having seen the leaked document, but more than happy to comment on it when it comes out more formally, will be to say, instead of putting only the onus on the supply side industry, why don't we work a little bit more on the demand side? And the demand side actually means encouraging member states, because you cannot compel them to work more closely together.
Well, on that point of encouraging member states, I do want to move to the MEPs now, because of course you're going to have a key role in negotiating the Parliament's position, and you're in a place where you can affect changes and maybe include something in the legislation that would also guarantee greater alignment between member states as well. So we have two MEPs with us today, one from the S&D, one from the EPP, which is very convenient because we are expecting two separate legal texts, and it wouldn't be absurd to think that one will go to the EPP and one will go to the S&D. And I wanted to hear from both of you on what you think is the proper balance here between innovation and access, and also what your priorities will be in these coming negotiations, and whether you think there's some kind of inevitable trade-off between innovation and access, which, people might disagree on that. So maybe we can start with you, Peter, and thank you for joining us today, and then go to Cyrus.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. So we are all impatiently waiting for the document tomorrow, and the good thing is it will arrive tomorrow. We discussed it earlier, so I guess no more postponement. And I would encourage all of us not only to look at the things we don't like, we may think to improve, but also the things that are good and desperately needed. The first point when we speak about pharma today is the shortage of medicine. Of course, member states have a responsibility. When they just look at the price and the tender don't look at quality and security of supply, we have a problem. Sorry for my voice, I may need a pharmaceutical substance. Try it with water first. So that is very important, but the member states' responsibility, but also European responsibility, and that's why we as EPP criticized the leak, because there was not a lot on security of supply. The shortage of medicine is a huge problem. I saw it myself when I worked in the hospital in the beginning of the year. There were children in hospital just because oral medication was not available and they should go to parental infusion therapy. Second point, antibiotic resistance. We desperately need to act here. 33,000 people and growing tendency are dying every year. Prudent use is important, and I hope to see something in the proposal. I campaigned many years for a targeted communication on top of the package leaflet, but we need innovation here. And the voucher has been criticized a lot in the leak. But everybody who is against the voucher should make a better proposal. And I didn't see so far. So let's work on the voucher or any other alternative. But you cannot blame pharmaceutical industry for not bringing new antibiotics. I know a lot of people that desperately want to bring innovation to the patient, but there are also the shareholders, the accounting people, and they will tell you if there's no business case, we invest elsewhere. So the framework must be ready. Then on the more narrow discussion of this meeting, we need a stick and a carrot, and the league mainly had a stick. So reduction of the data exclusivity from 8 years to 6 years, unless you meet additional criteria. And I hope, and not only because I wish it, but I also have, I have the feeling that this hope will not be disappointed, that something better comes out tomorrow. So not only less if you don't fulfill the criteria, but more if you do. They are still discussing around these figures, but I think if you do modulation, you need to do it in both directions. The stick cannot be the only instrument, but there needs to be a carrot, and I hope the carrot will really be incentivizing.
Before I let Cyrus respond, Peter, I have to ask you, I know that you wrote a letter to the Commission President that by all appearances was very influential. Now, we don't know the connection of cause and effect here, but we do know that the legislation was suspended temporarily. Was that your influence there?
So I'm not so powerful alone. First of all, there were other colleagues that co-signed the letter, and second, there were a lot of discussions inside the commissions among member states, stakeholders. So it was definitely not me. And of course, this question of stick and carrot was important, but also I think the shortage of medicine. There was just no answer in the draft, in the leak, so it's important. If they have something better tomorrow, then the 4 weeks were worthwhile.
Cyrus, I'd like you to respond, points of agreement, and I imagine also some areas of disagreement as well.
We're speaking a lot of carrots and sticks, which are very important in the different member states. And interestingly enough, coincidentally, Peter comes from the biggest member state. I come from the smallest.
What a nice symmetry.
Smallest member state. And I think that we've been speaking a lot when it comes to pharma on the small markets, the big markets, but in reality, we're one European Union and we should have one single market also for pharmaceuticals. And I think that that is fundamental when it comes to access to affordable pharmaceuticals, medicine and therapies in all different member states. We know that the current situation is that there's a lot of inequality when it comes to access and when it comes to the pricing of pharmaceutical products, and therefore my hope is that tomorrow, when we finally see the text of the legislation, is that these issues will start being addressed in a strong and in a serious way, because it is... I was going to use the term unacceptable. However, I understand the different realities where we're coming from and the European process, let's say, when it comes to the health sector. So rather than use the word unacceptable, I would use the word maybe challenging. And I think that we have a challenge in front of us that tomorrow needs to start being addressed and in a strong and in a serious manner. Now, if we speak on a single market, moving toward a single market in pharmaceuticals, how are we going to do that? What are the main things that are needed to achieve that? Will we achieve it in a fast way? Do we need gradual steps, which I always believe is the best way to arrive at the final destination we want to arrive? But there are a number of measures, like electronic labeling, for instance, which would very much help access in different member states. We saw, and I think that the pandemic has taught us a lot when it comes to healthcare, the collaboration between member states, led also by the European Commission. I think that we need to move towards new systems of how pharmaceuticals, medicines are purchased in different member states. There are various ways and means of how to do that. We could speak of joint procurement, for instance. When it came to the vaccines, It started on a bumpy foot, let's say, but then looking back, I think it was one of the biggest successes of the European Union when it comes to vaccines and the access to affordable vaccines, not only for the biggest of member states, but also to the smallest and peripheral member states, which was very much important. When it comes to pushing for more innovation, when it comes to pushing for Europe becoming great again, when it comes to innovation in not only in pharmaceuticals, but I would say in everything else, I think we need to remove, first of all, the reliance that we have on third countries. We have seen the pandemic once again was a very good eye-opener to what we need to do. After that, China is leading on innovation. We really need to get our act going. It does not only depend on the pharma legislation, obviously. I am, apart from the ENVI committee, I'm in the LIBE committee, and over there I was working on the legislation on attracting third country nationals to the European Union to be part of our workforce in order to be more innovative, because today we're losing people of talent to the United States, to Japan, to Australia. The United Kingdom and Europe is not seen as the place to go to if you want to use your talents and innovate and be part of the European Union of innovation. And I think we really need to look at that in a holistic manner, not only on pharma legislation, but when it comes to IT, AI, whatever we're talking about, we are losing on talent. We have an aging population. Our demographic is what it is all across the European Union, and we really need to invest to attract the best brains towards the European Union. So it's very important to make sure that we're attracting and investing in innovation. One issue when it comes to data exclusivity, I am of the belief that data exclusivity should be there once there's access in all member states to certain products. And I say this, I know the other side and I can understand it. However, it is a reality that we have 27 currently member states, 27 markets, and we need to make sure that all patients in every single member state would be able to have access to certain medicines. And if I could add add the last thing in this round of comments, I would also need to point out that when we're speaking of healthcare, when we're speaking of medicine, therapies, be they what they are, we are not speaking of luxury goods here. This is not a Gucci bag which needs to be exclusive to only a certain type of consumer. We're speaking of healthcare which needs to be accessible to all. And I think that in tomorrow's legislation, I hope to see this actually materializing in text which leads to this.
Okay, no, thank you, Cyrus. And I want to take that point about building new systems and ensuring access, because as you said, healthcare it's not a Gucci bag, it's not a luxury for patients, although maybe it's very costly to develop. I wanted to ask you, Maria, we mentioned how there's the kind of EU legislative superstructure, but then there's all these diverging health systems under it. We talk about having a health union, but we know that actually the health systems are still very far apart from each other. I wanted to know from the regulator's perspective, what are you speaking with each other and moving towards an alignment on the kind of non-legislative level to make sure that when it comes the moment for companies to ask reimbursement in different member countries, that process is made a little easier, and it's a little, it's not doing 27 times totally different things, but actually we're have some kind of convergence, even if it's not at the level of the legislation yet.
Actually, I think that this kind of convergence is happening right now, but it's so slow, and we are just at the starting point that maybe we are not able to perceive it, to see how it's going on. I think that the European Union has been built on the basis of a single market, but now it's the time to build a European Health Union, and we are on it. I think so. Regulators, pure regulators, used to work together in formal and informal ways to tackle supply issues, for example. And this is sometimes within the regulation, but sometimes it's only best practice that we perform just to give a solution to this problem in our countries. And in some states, the regulatory agencies has also the remit of price and reimbursement, and in this case, it's not the case in Spain, but in other states, I know that people in charge of price and reimbursement know that not only through the regulation, but also through the soft law, they can perform common procedures, common ways to improve the way we purchase medicines. We negotiate, we get an affordable medicines for all the states, and I think that's a way to work.
Great. Maybe panelists, just you very quickly, just because I know that you raised your hand earlier.
Okay, a non-partisan perspective. I think both MEPs have got complementary points. I just wanted to go in brief. I think Cyrus is absolutely right in raising the issue of a small versus large member state, for example. Obviously, coming from Malta, is a particular challenge. Some of these issues can be resolved with collaborative arrangements and agreements between member states. I think we need to see a lot more on that one. We have seen some collaborative arrangements in the past. The Veneto region in Italy with Slovenia and Tyrol, and using each other's facilities from healthcare access perspective. So I think, something like that could be replicated, or some configuration that could be replicated. I think Peter is absolutely right in raising the issue of AMR, and the appropriate incentivization needs to take place there. I'm not sure whether the voucher is the optimal way forward. From a literature perspective, we've seen ambivalent perspectives, but it's one option. My suggestion, which I've put in the literature as well, is what might happen if we treat new antibiotic agents as orphans to start with, and subsequently as utilization picks up, then obviously we kind of take the incentive away. From Peter, we heard what modulation looks like. So if it is what it looks like in terms of reducing data exclusivity by 2 years and selectively providing 1 plus something else, I don't think it's an incentive. It's a big stick with a tiny little carrot, compounded with the 27 additional sticks that Amit mentioned earlier on. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing the discussion, hopefully tomorrow as well, around patenting and SPCs. So if the course of action, if the direction of travel moving forward is more about personalized therapy and orphan diseases, because at the end of the day we've seen a lot more on that front, and cell and gene therapies, in other words, very expensive treatments, treating small populations, okay, we may need to think about the SPCs and the length of the effective patent life. And on the back of that, re-engineer what the Americans did back in 1984, whom we've actually copied in many ways. But I think at the end of the day, we need to come ahead of the curve through the Waxman-Hatch Act of 1984, incentivizing the innovative part of this industry, whilst at the same time making generic access faster. There are many tools that you can actually do that. Maybe we need to think about it, but as I said, it's early days.
Amit, over to you, and then I'm going to take some questions from the audience on Slido.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up the theme of innovation, and one of the things that is going to be raised in sort of various forms here. One is the hyper-innovation part. So one of the things that I hope the legislation does allow us to do is to innovate not just on the drug production, but we should be allowed to innovate on the care delivery system from our industry too. A lot of this is happening in the US, it's happening in many parts of the world. We're looking at actually delivering the drug and delivering digital tools, biomarkers, care tools that actually you can test as part of the drug development process. and you get data in market on what the option is. Introducing an innovation, especially a hyper innovation or an ATMP, without innovating on the system is just going to meet a flat end. And then everyone's going to struggle with it. So we should be as part of our trials. But then it comes back down to, are we really incentivized to do precision medicine type or subpopulation type trials in Europe? We do most of our trials in the US, and most of those trials in US and China. So the number of ATMP trials happening in Europe now is dropping away. And I think that's going to be a competitive disadvantage unless something in the legislation allows us to actually build that ecosystem within Europe as well.
Now we have this question from two people, one from Sergio Napolitano of Medicines for Europe and also from Jan Lecombe from Eurordis. It's really the same question, and it's basically this, which is that, Europe has a very favorable IP arrangement. If anything, it was made a little bit more favorable 20 years ago, 30 years ago, rather, when the supplementary protection certificate was introduced. And in that time, we've seen the research gap with the US increase. The research gap here means the amount of money that companies are spending in R&D in the US and in Europe, respectively. So if we have a situation where we have a pretty good IP situation between patents and data protection, and we see that this gap is growing, doesn't this mean that it's not the IP that is the factor here, that there's other things at work?
So just to take that point, it's great fixing IP when a drug is available and approved. What you're not fixing is the process that's being referred to, which is where is the innovation being done at its get-go? And I think one of the things that we're seeing is, look, in
clinical trials.
So it's clinical trials. It's the institutional links between academic centers. It's where the patients sit. It's where the systems that speed up trials, where the ability for universities to collaborate with industry to do these trials at speed within a relevant system with the right comparators, is that really being enabled? And we're seeing a lot of that transition happening. The infrastructure in the US is so much smoother. And then it's just those triangles of academia, industry, and having the patient populations is just it's more strongly set up in many, many parts. It's much more organized.
We don't have a Boston in Europe.
And then on top of that, it's innovators. Yeah. Well,
Peter.
Yeah, clinical trials is an issue, and it was really regrettable what happened to the data bank. So we wanted to make life easier, and unfortunately, it was more complicated. So I hope this will be solved soon. Second question is movement of data. European health data space is crucial. So scientists tell me that they just go mad because something that is mandatory in France is forbidden in Germany and vice versa. But the third point is reimbursement. So when you have a long period of data protection, but the reimbursement starts only after 3-4 years and not in all member states, then we also have a problem because the time for payback is delayed. And that's why I think member states and national authorities should just come out of their corner and say, we have a European HTA, but for us, it seems different. When a cancer drug makes people survive 2 years longer in France, it's not only half a year in Germany or Slovakia. So we are not so different. Yeah. And it's mainly politics that exaggerates some slight differences. Of course, real innovations and Me Too are different. There is a room in between. But more specific reimbursement and faster decisions here. HTA has done a job already, but we need to do better. But for the moment, the same kind of market exclusivity in the US is just giving you much more money. So that's why the period in Europe may have to be a little bit longer to compensate that.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I have an incredible sense of déjà vu. When I transitioned from monetary economics into health economics, we did a study for the European Parliament in 1993. And we highlighted exactly that difference between North America and Europe and the incentive structure. So obviously goes beyond, way beyond the kind of issues that we've been discussing here, and obviously into the funding, etc., or the venture capital and the university industry collaborations and so on. But on certain issues, I think we still are dodging the bullet, and the bullet is data. Increasingly, drugs come to market with phase 2, occasionally phase 1 studies. All right. So confirmatory trials with real-world evidence need to take place. What are we doing on real-world data on that front? We did some survival analysis not so long ago on drugs obtaining conditional marketing authorization, and comparing those with drugs with standard marketing authorization. The timing is abysmal for the former compared with the latter. This is the opposite of what you expect to see, obviously, from the gap between marketing authorization and HTA decision. So I think something needs to be done there.
So and the other thing is conditional marketing authorization isn't working.
Takes a lot longer for HTA decisions to, obviously, because there are obvious issues with data gaps, early phase, uncertainties, incomplete evidence, immature evidence, and so on and so forth. But obviously something needs to be done on a wholesale basis and through a lot more collaboration. And probably both the European Medicines Agency, but also the new HTA mechanisms have to do a lot more work on conditions for real-world data and real-world evidence. The US has taken, again, the lead on that front. To some extent, the European Medicines Agency has followed, but we need to do a lot more, a lot faster.
Cyrus, I just wanted to let you respond, representing Malta.
I think following on what has just been said by Panos, one of the most important things I believe that needs to happen is to have a legislative framework that allows for the creation of cross-border wholesale dealers, because at this moment in time that is very much lacking. We need to move and be much stronger on that. I earlier on mentioned e-labeling, etc. So we really need legislation that allows medicinal packs to move freely within the European Union, which takes me back to the original message of not having different markets but one single market. But I would like to make reference also to our friend from Eurordis, who also made a comment, and I think that is where we could start working even strongly towards a European health union. I think no country within the European Union has enough numbers, even if you take the biggest member states, when it comes to rare diseases. And I think that a European
joint procurement there work?
Well, it could be joint procurement. I believe that joint procurement could work also for other things. But when it comes to rare diseases, I think joining forces together as 27 member states is the obvious thing to do, because you can have slightly higher numbers. It still will remain a rare disease, but joining forces together, and I always push the Commission to go towards that, at least as a start, where we need to work together when it comes to rare diseases. And I think it's very important that in a European Health Union, we have a patient-centered European Health Union, which firstly focuses on such issues.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine it would benefit the industry as well to have quick access to a larger population pool. Even if maybe the price goes down slightly, you make up for it with speed. But I did want to touch on the issue of ATMPs before we leave, and we just have 3 minutes left. But Maria, I know this is an area where Spain is doing a lot of work, and in Barcelona, for example, you have some very good centers. What has been the experience with cell and gene therapies? The pharmaceutical legislation isn't going to do a whole bunch here, but I believe that there's ideas to maybe standardize the hospital exemption a bit, maybe put it on firmer footing. You know, what are your thoughts on the area of ATMPs and what needs to change?
We are very proud of our work with ATMPs. We think that we have been able to engage academia researchers with patients and with the regulatory pathway when it's been necessary. The regulation for ATMPs and for the hospital exemption was thought to make possible that researchers can develop their own medicines in a non-routinary basis and targeted to a specific patient. But we want that these medicines are produced with the same standards of quality that industrial, almost the same, that the industrial medicine. So we have our own national law that gives the requirements from the quality point of view, specific requirements that the producers has to meet. We perform inspections. We give them GMPs. They have also the authorization holder is a hospital, and the hospital has to maintain record of adverse events, and they have to send to the agency a pharmacovigilance annual report, so we can ensure the safety through continuous pharmacovigilance, the quality, and also a kind of efficacy, because these kind of projects began with proof of concept and a clinical trial with a limited number of patients. We perform a preliminary benefit risk assessment, and if in case it's positive, we allow them, we begin the process to give them the authorization of hospital exemption to take these medicines to more patients. But having said that, I think that we can talk about two kinds of ATMPs subject to hospital exemption. One that can be targeted to the regulatory pathway because it's aimed to treat a significant number of patients, and another one kind of ATMPs that is targeted to a so reduced number of patients that it will never be attractive for the industry and cannot support an industrial marketing authorization. So it has to remain within the academic and the hospital settings. For the first one, our obligation is to give scientific and regulatory advisories to take these researchers to the European Medicines Agency, as we have done with Barcelona. Yeah.
Okay. And in the second case, instead, the patient populations are just too small.
Yeah, and the second case, what we have to do is to ensure that these patients, although they are a reduced number of patients, have the correct medicine, the right medicine they need with quality standards, with vigilance of their safety, and ensuring the medicine.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Maria. We are out of time. We've come to an end of our panel discussion, but if anyone has any final remarks they want to make, they have 10 seconds. Any of the other panelists as well? Yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, we talk about the product once it's registered and got access as the kind of end of the innovation step. I just want to remind us that one of the things in industry, most of the innovation happens after you're registered. So we have to I hope the legislation encourages the fact that further research, whether it's other trials, new patient populations, line extensions, combinations, especially in the cancer area, that work has to be incentivized. And if it's disincentivized, you won't get that breadth of expansion and real learning about the products once it's in the market.
Panos, please. Very brief, though, because we have to run.
Innovation and access go hand in hand.
What a beautiful way to sum it up. You've done my job for me. Thank you so much, Panos. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Cyrus, Amit, and Peter. It's been great to have you here today on the day before that the pharmaceutical legislation is going to be published. When we read it tomorrow, we'll have all of your remarks floating in our heads. Clearly, my one takeaway from this is that, and it sounds cliched, but it's really the truth, that the pharmaceutical legislation is just the start, that there's many different things that need to be fixed, and they all need to be fixed at the same time if we really want the European system to work. And this goes from data to clinical trials, HTA, geographic clustering, financing. All these things need to be converging with the pharmaceutical legislation if we want the system to improve and hopefully some of that European competitiveness to return, while at the same time ensuring access to patients. So another big thank you to the panelists. Thank you so much to our partners, Bayer. I did want to read the poll, which has now concluded, which was, how can the EU ensure increased patient access to new innovative medicines in Europe? And the possibilities are a legislative framework that suits state-of-the-art healthcare solutions by implementing already approved legislation like the HTA, or through non-legislative solutions, including increased public-private collaboration, or a combination of all the above. It won't come as a surprise to anyone that the overwhelming majority of people voted for a combination of all of the above. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.